Jack, we're back. It's so good to see you. Man, I'm super stoked to be back doing podcasting with you. This is fantastic.
Absolutely, man. It's been a couple of years, but we've stayed in contact. We just haven't had a chance to record our conversations.
That's it. We're recording now. We are back. A little bit different, right? All audio last time. And it's not even been a couple of years. It's been 8-ish years since we've come back. And right off the bat, we're doing present futures. And we're going to discuss, I'm going to share my screen so we can kind of like walk a little bit through this. We're going to talk about the world's first patient that was treated with personalized CRISPR gene editing technology therapy at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. So a couple things about this. I saw this news and I'm like, oh, Philadelphia, that's like right near me. That's right near Asbury Park. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. That's CRISPR Cas9. I know about CRISPR Cas9. It's the gene editing software that allows for specific genetic changes to be made at that level. And 8 years ago, we talked about this. I do not remember which podcast we talked about this on, but I know we talked about it. It was sort of at the beginning. And I thought it was really, really interesting to discuss this particular one. Like, so this is a very historic breakthrough. Child diagnosed with this rare genetic disorder. Essentially, it's a rare metabolic disease called or known as severe carbamyl phosphate synthase. So it's CPS1 deficiency. A family in a tough position, they were able to treat this with CRISPR technology. The very first time I saw, in utero, if you will. And then it made me think, okay, well, what's been going on? What have we been missing in the past 8 years or so? So what did I do? Of course, it's 2025. I clicked on ChatGPT to have me go and digest some of this stuff. I found a lot of stuff out. So number one, there's a lot of therapies that are really close. So we're talking sickle cell disease. There's ongoing trials right now for leukemia, muscular dystrophy, inherited blindness. There's been some changes. So there's actually, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more depth, but there's been not just the CRISPR-Cas9 that we were talking about, but there's been these variants of this technology beyond Cas9. There's Cas12, there's Cas13, there's Cas14. We're going to talk a little bit about them in just a second too. And there's been other things, right? Ethical developments, different ways that it could be used for different industries, agnostic technologies. So just, futures never changes, or excuse me, futures never changes. It is always changing. It's always evolving, right? Technology is always evolving. And it's really good just to talk about this sort of one more time. So Jack, I know I sent you some links. What do you think of this? Did you hear about this piece of news that came out? It was about a month ago.
Yeah, I mean, I've been following CRISPR for the last couple of years. So I one of my passions is medical technologies, and I've been following it so closely that I recommend it to. So my wife has an uncle who has a son who's young, much younger than us, and he's getting ready to go to Georgia Tech for biomedical engineering. I told him, I said, you need to be studying CRISPR. If that's where you want to be, that is the future of technology. And he's like, yeah, already planning on it. So he's a smart kid. So he realizes this is the future. I mean, just the possibility to cure thousands of different disorders and diseases. CRISPR is, I mean, you and I talked about it. We have it on our like Trello board of our past episodes, so we can look back and see when it was. Years ago, we were talking about this. Now it's finally reaching its fruition.
Yes, absolutely. Now, there is a specific advancement that's been happening really since 2019. I was going to share it just because I think just the look of it was just like super cool. This idea around prime editing. So it's a newly developed gene editing method. It improves. It's more precise than CRISPR-Cas9. It just uses a modified Cas9 enzyme. It nicks it's like one DNA strand. So instead of cutting it, it just nicks one little one, and then it combines with some sort of reverse transcript enzyme, and it writes the code directly into the DNA in real time. Completely fascinating that this is happening. And then there's other investments too that I was going to talk to you about, which is the stuff going beyond CRISPR-Cas9. So what are we talking about? We're talking about Cas12. So Cas9, it's the OG CRISPR. It's used in gene editing, whether it's microbes, plants, animals, diagnostic tests. So it's specifically used for that. There's Cas12, which is for detection. So detection for viruses like HPV or SARS-CoV, which I think we all know about for sure. There's
Uh-huh.
Cas13, which is even higher sensitivity. This is along the lines of Zika or dengue fever. Actually, that's the one for COVID-19. And then there's this other one called Cas14, which is for another, sort of next level precision diagnosis. So there's so many different applications for this. We're talking about the ability to completely engineer at a high precise editing point for bacteria, animals, human cells in real time. Obviously, we just saw the first live person, the diagnostic tool. So being able to identify like what diseases are out there, how to treat them. Obviously, therapeutics for gene therapy, and then also agricultural. So being able to come up with new ways to embed genetic changes in agriculture. So a lot of really interesting stuff happening. Do you see any pros, cons? Is it just throw CRISPR in me and turn me a different color? Like, what do you think about this?
This reminds me of I don't know if you're familiar with Second City, right? It was a comedy
Yeah.
troupe, right? And I saw them in Chicago, years ago when I was much younger, and they were talking about being able to create your child, right? And
Mm,
it was funny because it was like a African American male and like a Asian female, and they created like a white child with like who was like lanky and all this like crazy interesting stuff. It was comedy, but that's actually now becoming true. You're now able
yeah.
to create people. So there's a lot of ethical concerns that we have to talk about with this as well, Chris. And I think that's why
Mm,
is slower in its adoption. I mean, at least in the Western world. So as we talked in our podcast years ago, someone had edited children in utero and in China, right? And then that man was thrown in prison and now is out and he is out there working for the Chinese government, I assume. So there are some serious concerns now with what are the ethical things, what could be done? Are we going to have a thing where, especially like in places like India where like skin whitening it's a huge popular industry. Are you going to see that as, now people are going to make that they're going to genetically alter their children so they have lighter skin? What are the social
mm,
impacts, societal impacts? Obviously, there's great things that are happening, right, with CRISPR, right, especially in the tackling of diseases and hereditary diseases and things like that. So that's a great thing, right? I actually have a relative who carries is a connected through marriage, but he's a relative who carries a genetic deficiency, right? That's been very difficult for him to have children. And there's also concerns if he did have children. So that is a thing where maybe this could alter that. So it's life changing. We talked about this before, man. This is going to change so many aspects of medicine. And it's finally medicine is catching up to technology. We've always had technology have an effect on medicine or treatments and things like that. Well, what if you could completely eradicate the disease entirely, right? Sickle cell anemia, right? It was something that we talked about that CRISPR can do. So this
yeah.
this is fascinating, man. I mean, what about you? What do you see as like the societal things that are or the good and bad of this?
Well, I mean, there's many different things. I think this dovetails directly into a lot of the work that's happening in longevity. I think maybe that's another thing we can look at in the future as another present futures is, where longevity's at. And I know a lot of people
Yes.
are talking about living to 150. And when you don't have diseases, when you don't have cancer, that completely changes how the society is working because perhaps maybe your diseases that impact you don't negate or progress your death, but the physical, right? Like breaking a hip and these sorts of things. And how do you deal with folks that have these sort of issues and what happens when it comes to social safety nets? I mean, there's so many different things. I'm really, really glad you brought up sort of the ethical component because I think, one last thing we can discuss here is that there actually has been a framework for governance. It's been put out from the World Health Organization. They have a governance framework around this technology with CRISPR Cas9 or CRISPR technology.
Absolutely.
It's, ethical, transparent, effective oversight of how we do human genome editing. So it triggered this. This came out some years back. I will not doubt there'll be new legislation happening. I did want to share, I have this pulled up. I wanted to make sure that we could see it because as of right now, this was about 6 or 7 years ago. And you can see this is not widely available in every country. There are many countries that
Mhm.
actually say, no, we're going to prohibit this or there's exceptions. So it's sort of not carte blanche that we're just going to allow this sort of technology to potentially impact your country. And like you said, I think there's going to be so many different potential repercussions to this, positive and negative. I'm all about stewarding this technology. I do not want humanity suffering for needless ways. And whether it is new biotechnology, which includes vaccines or new ways of doing surgeries or CRISPR technology, if there's a way to aid and negate human suffering, I'm all about it. But I do think we need to walk it slowly, think deeply about it, and implement it in a responsible way.
All right. So for my present futures, Chris, this is something that I think is really relevant, especially with what happened last night. So when we're recording this right now, Iran is sending missiles towards Israel after a retaliation. So this might be posted, a little bit, after that time frame. But they also sent out drones, and they were talking about drones and having, sending those out to attack Israeli cities. So this is a topic that, what we want to talk about is the future of warfare, specifically around drones. It also had just happened that, unfortunately, there's a couple of conflicts happening in the world right now, as you know. There's there's the release, I think, June 3rd-ish, where Ukraine said that they had successfully attacked multiple airplanes, right, military planes in Russia, and had destroyed somewhere. The number depends on who you ask. It's between 10, it's 10 plus, very expensive bombers and very expensive planes. What this then prompted, which is really interesting, is a conversation in the West now for the future of warfare, specifically around drones and artificial intelligence in those drones. So it's something you and I have discussed right before. We've discussed drones, maybe in aerial drones, as in like maybe for civilian purposes, for flying vehicles. But now we're talking about drones, how important they have been for Ukraine and Russia when they're attacking each other for the past couple of years of warfare. What's been really interesting so far is that drone warfare is now being seen by the West. And this article that I sent you, where they talked about taking lessons from Ukraine, drones are now being seen. And I'll share my screen so you can see this. And so they're saying that now countries are learning from this. So Taiwan now sees themselves, especially smaller countries, like Ukraine has a third of the population of Russia, but they're expected to create over, I think, hundreds of thousands of drones this year for combat operations. So now they're saying that drones are the biggest killer in the war. And Ukraine versus Russia, there are more people dying from drones than there are from artillery, and then there are from gunshots. Like, it is literally, drones are the highest number of the killer in the Ukrainian-Russia. Knowing this, Chris, and I know you've been paying attention to drones as well. What are some of your thoughts about, like, what's the next steps of this? And do you see this progressing? Do you see the West learning, and this is Taiwan, but do you see like the West and the rest of the world really learning from this conflict? And what do you see that the next steps might be?
I would say, so there's a couple things, right? There's some ideas around this drones and like even the innovation of like what has been happening with Ukraine and Russia. So early on, Ukraine actually invested in Turkish drones. These Turkish drones were very much what we were doing with the CIA or with special ops, where there's these huge drones are doing reconnaissance with big, gigantic bombs, and they were doing very well. They ended up bombing key cities, and it was fantastic. Cost $63 million. They're very slow moving. And Russia's got, anti-artillery and fighter jets and all sorts of different things, and they shot them out. And so it ended up being a very expensive, very, very good initially, but very slow moving stuff. So they're like, let's actually not spend that amount. Let's go to Best Buy and get DJI quadcopters, and let's go and do interesting things. And they literally just did that, right? I think it was something like 30-40% of the AWACS, which is the TAC aircraft. And keep in mind, I'm an Air Force veteran, so this really hits home for me. But I think overall, there's a headline. It is, this completely changes how power could potentially be perceived, how actually warfare, it's like a guerrilla warfare tactic for the 21st century. It does not, similar to Vietnam or Spain going up against Napoleon in the 1800s, where guerrilla warfare came from. They fought from the hills. Here's a smaller country with way less resources that innovated their way to using a technology to their advantage. And I think it says a lot about the future of warfare. And you look at a
Mhm.
country like America and maybe even China, and there's some consternation nation and maybe inside our own government that we need to build more. We need more aircraft carriers. We need more fighter jets, more. And frankly, we might be shackled by excessive debt and investment because we're actually investing in old military stuff when actually we need to do much less with much more precision and all the rest. So
Mhm.
this changes a lot. It makes that there's other things that are like interesting about it too that I'd like to discuss. But anything else that you were able to pick up in the initial stuff around drones?
Well, one thing that's interesting is the
Hmm.
way that they deployed the drones in Ukraine to attack these Russian planes. Is they put them on, they call them lorries. They put them on like semi trucks, and they paid
Right.
Russian and unknown people. They didn't know what they were transporting, but they put them on these trucks. They said, "Hey, these are wooden cabins, and we need you to transport all across Russia." They transported unwittingly. They didn't look into wooden cabins, and then when they were parked and left there, that's when the drones were, they used when they think is the Russian telecom network and operate from the telecom network and actually then launch from those cabins all at once and attack these planes. So one of the implications, right, one of the things you hit on the head, right, is warfare. What people don't realize, right, especially in the modern age, is that World War II wasn't one with really expensive equipment. It was one with
Mm.
mass quantities of very inexpensive equipment that you could mass produce and affordably so that you could then overwhelm your adversary. It seems to be, at least with a smaller player, and Russia does have their hands tied somewhat with being able to attack the smaller player. They're not using nuclear bombs or tactical nukes, or they're not allowed to use, supposedly, they're not allowed to use chemical weapons, other things like that. And that's something to think as well. This is not a realistic war of if it was two superpowers versus each other, but it is an interesting aspect that, I mean, Russia has now reached over 1 million casualties in the war that they've
Mm.
had, right? Over a million casualties. They are, their summer offensive has been basically stalled. And a lot of that, they're claiming credit to the drones. And now, Russia has also developed these really advanced capabilities to shoot drones down. So not only do they have abilities for drones that are going up in the air, because they were, you were able to scramble their signals, right, and they would come down. Well, now what they're doing is they're launching tethers, and actually it has a cord that goes with
Whoa.
this drone, so
I didn't
so
know
that
that.
it can't be, yeah, so it can't be interfered with because the cord is what's controlling it, right? There's no like satellites or anything like that that are controlling the drone. So now that's blocking any sort of an issue with being the signal being blocked. So that's an innovation, and innovations also are coming around with like Russia's building laser weapons, right? A laser defense grid, right? So Putin believes that drone warfare is the future for Russia, and Russia has really taken that into account, right? And Russia really hasn't forgotten its Cold War mentality, its World War II mentality of build a lot, build fast, and throw tons of forces at things. And they're grinding Ukraine down, despite Ukraine's building of these capabilities. Ukraine just doesn't have the manpower and the resources to really compete with Russia still. If it wasn't for the West really supporting Ukraine, Ukraine would have fallen, years ago. So, that's something to think of as well when you're talking about the future of war.
Yeah.
What about AI, guys? Where do you see AI playing in this space?
Oh, man. Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to discuss. So another thing too, before we get into AI, because it's
Yeah.
so important, the
Yeah.
very first drone-to-drone strike happened during the Russian and Ukrainian war, which is really, really fascinating because that's where we're at. Where we're talking about the future of warfare is now. That's a futurist mantra. The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed, and it's happening where we are having drone on drone attacks. And of course, where does drone on drone go? Swarm on swarm, potentially. And how do you
Mhm.
actually allow for swarms to coordinate and connect? Artificial intelligence, autonomous. So right now, I was listening to a podcast on this, and who do you want to be on your drone team? I mean, who would you pick, Jack, to be on your drone team? Probably,
Video
I'm
gamers,
assuming
man.
Call of Duty people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, some young 18-year-old kids that know how to use joysticks really well and have good hand-eye
Mhm.
coordination. Absolutely. And there will be that. But, in the future, when we have swarms and potential for autonomous
Oh yeah.
drone, not only surveillance, but which already happens, but actually drone on drone attacks, full on swarms going against each other, this is going
Mhm.
to require coordinated, agentic, really artificial intelligence, where you have interconnected communications, real time maneuvering, embedded programming, all through, interconnected communications. different sort of types of warfare or munition, doing either automatic and or, just switching between reconnaissance versus like attack mode, all at the touch of a button. And what this means is that, okay, so right now maybe the 18 to 22-year-olds on Call of Duty or whatever are the ones that
Yes.
are shooting down and making stuff happen on the battlefield. In the future, it might just be the folks sitting in MIT or in Chinese AI universities or Iran or Russia or XYZ country that we be building the code or the hardware and software to actually make this stuff hum. So yes, this is happening. Right, the future of warfare is happening right now, right in front of us, and very soon AI will completely take this over. And then, of course, that's eventually how we get to the Matrix. So, so I mean,
Well, I mean,
caution,
you're
be cautious.
I mean, you're talking about this, right? So, but this
Hmm.
is this is I mean, this one of these reports that I read, and we can post some of these links right when we post the podcast.
Sure.
Is one of these is it was a Western general talking about AGI, right? When
Mm.
AGI comes into play with drones, he said, think about it this way: what if you could have AI being able to pick the exact target that it needs to know, like maybe aim for a gas tank right beside the plane that it's trying to attack, right? Because it just recognizes through image search what that is and quickly attacks that and can do it in the blink of an eye as opposed to much faster than a human operator. What happens when AGI is able to go in and recognize where's the most maximum damage that it can inflict in a crowd of people or a crowd of soldiers, right? Hopefully not people, but soldiers. So like those types of things, that's what people are already talking about is
Mm.
that when drones are able to then have onboard AI to make these decisions. You don't have to have human operators, and you can launch thousands or millions of these. So it's really scary. Some people are talking about how China is envisioning like attack ships with thousands of drones on the attack ships. I mean that is something that that's the future of warfare, and the West hasn't really thought about it in quantities like that before. But that's the next steps. It's these drone on drones. It's these drones with artificial intelligence. And I'll hit one other point here, bringing us back to our original point when we talked about the Iranian-Israeli war. Iran got those drones from us in the United States. People don't realize that how did they start to build their drone capabilities? Some U.S. drones fell or were shot down over
That's
Iranian waters, and
that's
they reverse engineered it. So a lot of the drone warfare that's happening in Ukraine now is really thanks to the United States. As far as the bad parts, of when the drones were originally attacking all of the different sites, right? Because those were Iranian drones that Russia was buying, right? So like that's people don't always connect those two things together. But it is something important to note that drone warfare was really launched for thanks to the United States, and it's unthanks maybe to the United States.
interesting. We never really completely discuss how the information flow. It's always the technology. You've got whatever president or whatever person in charge, and they're doing the parade, and you see the new technology and all the rest. And you don't really discuss how that was made, right? Is it espionage? Is it dumb luck? Is it the university investment you've been doing? Sometimes it's all of the things, right? Maybe you go and like we did in World War II or post World War II with NASA, where we went and pulled a bunch of Nazis so we can build rockets and go to the moon. You get the information wherever you can. So that's actually a fascinating thing to think about, that really the future of security and intelligence operations is going to be that much more important in the future of modern warfare. I will say one more thing about this. Countries aren't doing very well, right? There's a lot of authoritarian democracies, maybe authoritarianism, less democracies, more authoritarianism coming. People are not happy with a lot of countries. There's a lot of, potential strongmen, a lot of issues. And when you think, okay, Ukraine versus Russia, what do you think about the future of domestic terrorism when it comes to the usage of drones? Guerrilla warfare just does not have to be country on country. It could be individuals, it could be actors. We had, of course, the war on terrorism when it comes to bombs and all the various things that we had during that really tumultuous time around the world geopolitically. Now we can see that drone technology can take out huge amounts of infrastructure, huge amounts of military hardware, and there's very little investments in it. So we haven't even discussed the ideas around the regulations, the proper flying. I live in New Jersey. We had this whole issue last year where we weren't sure what drones were in the air near the airports, and people were trying to figure out what's going on. Not even sure if we still figured that out. So more to come, but it's just so interesting because this is not just the military aspects. Drones are impacting industry. I know, like in Rochester State here in upstate New York, there's a drone bachelor's degree you can get. A drone technology is not going anywhere. It's going to embed itself not only in warfare, but all over industry and all over the world. And it'll be really interesting
Mhm.
to see its potential many features for sure.
The last thing I'll leave our listeners with, or our viewers with, right, is this article that came out that NATO, and this was today, right? NATO is now saying, look, our commanders, top commanders are saying, look, we are not ready for modern war, and that's scary from a Western perspective
Mm.
because China has really thought about this. They have thousands of cheap missiles that they've built, and their whole thing is deterrence, right? So if a ship is coming towards their shore, they're going to fire 800 missiles at it. Right? You can't carry on board enough interceptors for that kind of overpowerment. And that's something the cheap, the fast, the quick, being able to build. We haven't thought about that from the Western perspective because we haven't fought a modern war recently. We fought wars against terrorists, like you mentioned, with the war on terror, against less, countries that could not possibly match the firepower of the West. But if it was two superpowers, that would be vastly different. And so we have to adapt and be able to have a dual strategy where we could fight smaller instances like that against, what is it, the terrorists in the Middle East, or against, I can't think of the name, Daesh, as they call them, or ISIS, or against, people. But if we think about from superpower to superpower, people need to think that warfare needs to change from what we've recently fought. And we'll leave that with people to think about the future for drones.